So hello, everyone. My name is John Eckhart, professor at the University of Wisconsin and editor-in-chief at the Entrepreneur Innovation Exchange. And here we are today to talk with Rachel Carpenter, who is CEO of Intrinio. And she has a very interesting background, the letter to a career in entrepreneurship, including working for Epic Systems in Madison, Wisconsin, writing for the Forbes Finance Council, and being an advisor to startup companies and a variety of different things. And so we're here to talk today about chapter 5, I believe it is, of the Startup Owner's Manual, which is a great book on how to basically start a company and avoid a lot of the costly mistakes that entrepreneurs, some entrepreneurs have been prone to make. And it's really focused around, hyper-focused on issues of customer discovery and making sure you're building a product that people want to buy. So we're going to talk about that in a little bit, but I thought I would first start just by asking you, Rachel, if you could kind of talk us through, like, how you went from, being an undergrad at the University of Wisconsin at a great school, to being an entrepreneur today.
It's a great question. I had a horrible job while I was working at Matt and during school. I'm sure you guys are familiar. There's a big healthcare software company in the area. And I was working in the benefits department. I had a boss who just micromanaged me. And at the time, I was actually just getting a degree in finance. And I had such a bad experience with my boss. I was like, I'm never doing this again. I will never work for somebody else ever again. I cannot subject myself to this. And I walked to the business school and I added entrepreneurship as a major. And I had no idea what I wanted to do. Probably like a lot of the current students don't know what they want to do yet. I just knew I wanted to do something entrepreneurial and be my own boss and be a better boss than her. I was like, I need to learn from her mistakes and go out there and be a better boss for whoever I manage one day. And so I actually met my co-founder while we were in school. He was pursuing kind of a CPA track. I was more on the finance track. And it's an interesting story. He was brilliant. I really believed in this idea he had. He was building a kind of like a stock valuation platform. You can type in a stock ticker. It tells you whether or not to buy or sell the stock. It was basically kind of the premise of what he was building, but obviously a lot of logic happening behind the scenes and complex calculations and valuation models. And so I saw what he was building and I was like, this is cool. I would love to help you build this. And so I was interviewing, kind of graduating at the time, turned down all the job offers I had. He was a year ahead of me and moved down to Chicago and slept on his couch for a year and taught myself how to program so that I was able to actually help him, which was that's a whole lesson in and of itself. And I'm not allowed to program anymore. My CTO doesn't let me anywhere near the code base, which is a blessing. But I got dangerous enough to kind of get things off the ground. And so that was what we originally thought our business was going to be. I'm living in Chicago. I'm sleeping on a couch. I've turned down the whole classic, get a job, go through some financial rotational program, turned it all down. And we obviously needed a lot of data it's like a financial analysis app, right? Like you need stock prices, you need tons of data to integrate to run all this analysis. But we were illegally screen scraping it from 10,000 websites. So like going to Yahoo Finance, kind of pulling all the data points down, plugging them in. And we knew that we couldn't launch a business that way. So we went out and tried to buy data feeds. And we got quoted $70,000 a month. So you can imagine you've just spent a year of your life thinking you're going to build this app and you can't even like put gas in your car. Is kind of what it felt like. So it was the biggest pivot ever. We had to shelve the whole thing. We have no money. I'm sleeping on a couch and we're like, well, let's go solve this data problem instead. If this is a problem for us, it's probably a problem for other people, which is where the customer discovery has to come in, right? And so that's kind of how the journey went. I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I met my co-founder, tried one business idea, discovered an even bigger idea through some of the challenges we faced with that first app. And then that's kind of how the journey got started.
Wow. And, it sounds like both of you and your co-founder had business degrees as like your primary training. But it sounds like you picked up some coding experience along the way. How did that happen?
Oh man. So we knew that the subject area for the type of app we wanted to build was so specific to finance that to have like a CPA or us over the shoulder of an engineer for them to build it would have just taken too much time. And I actually don't think that's the case. Like looking back, I wouldn't recommend that. I think in our case, it made sense because it was a super complex financial model that we needed to program. So it actually was faster for us to learn how to program. But in most cases, it's the reverse. It's like, if you're building an app, speed is so important. Like if you don't have 10 years of engineering experience, like I'm not a huge fan of those coding camps. Like you can't get good enough fast enough before somebody else copies your idea. So give away the equity, go get a technical co-founder. I definitely believe in that. But for us, we wanted to build it ourselves. And so we learned. And I think the one pro to that was that I earned some respect from my own engineers because I know what they go through. Like I have enough of the technical background to say, I taught myself how to program. I know how hard it is. So I get a lot of respect from my engineering team from that. But it was a journey. I mean, I Googled, how do you program? I was like, we got to get this thing built. We basically had to take something from Excel and build it into a web application. And so Ruby, HTML, CSS, Googling, like I started making I just made a square box appear on a web page. Then I turned it blue. Then I rotated it 90 degrees. And it's just incremental like that until pretty soon I built our entire website and started to build some of the logic in the background. So very incremental. Like if I had approached it as if I need to learn how to code tomorrow, I would have never done it. It was just like build that square box, then turn it blue, and then one step at a time, and you build over time. But it took a year for me to really get enough to get the website and the logic built.
Now, you mentioned earlier that if you're going to do it again, you probably would have gone after someone with more programming experience. Let's set that aside for just a moment. We'll get back to that. You would you recommend keeping that in mind that business students today do get some programming experience on their own?
I do. I think I actually just wrote an article about this for Forbes about how like Excel isn't enough anymore for business students like it used to be. But they don't even really teach you that. Like I got a finance degree and we didn't really do very much in Excel, but that's not even enough anymore. I mean, I think more so kind of on the data analytics side, like digging into Tableau, R, more statistical stuff, analytics, that's all important. Basic kind of database querying languages, SQL. And if you do anything, do Python, 100%. You can go in so many different directions with it, whether you want to go down machine learning or just regular engineering. I think if it's interesting to you, do it. Some people don't have the mind for it, right? So if you're coming up against a wall and it feels wrong, don't do it. But it's not going to hurt you to have those skills. It's just, you need to have somebody on your team that's got a decade of experience doing the real work, right? Like supplementarily, is that a word? Supplementary skill, it's helpful. But if you're building a serious business, you got to have somebody with a ton of experience.
This is business. So if it's not a real world, you can run out and trademark it and you're ready to roll. So, maybe it's even better that it might be a word that you made up just now. Yeah. One of the things that I'm seeing amongst the students now is that there are some students that are quite sophisticated with code. They're entrepreneurs, they're business people, and they're kind of replacing employees, like the need to kind of hire and manage people, and also the need to raise money with code and APIs to get activities done in their firms. So I feel like that at one level, this is like, there's a next level of like transformation of business as you have other entrepreneurs that are kind of building resources for other people that then you can kind of license or access through different APIs for a fee that kind of creates this whole other world. Yeah. So I do agree with you that some use, having exposure at least to those tools can be helpful. The other thing I want to ask you is that we do get a lot of attention to the technology founder in a startup. And it's often, there are certain groups that are really focused, investment groups in particular, they're really focused on that. And they kind of downplay maybe the importance of business skills. You're someone with a very strong business background. Yeah. Share with us, like, what do you think a business person brings to the startup world? Like, what's the job? What's the value add? It
is so important for anybody who's ever dealt with like an eccentric tech person. EQ is important too, right? Like investor relations, management of a team, hiring the right people, developing the culture, designing the vision, the mission, keeping communication open. Like take someone super technical and ask them to manage a distributed workforce during a pandemic. They're going to have a panic attack, right? Like there's this whole separate set of skills. I always talk about being a CEO as like, it's like octopus work. Like you have to have your tentacles in some and just take things that are flying at you. You have to have a lot of resilience and you have to keep the ship afloat. And I always use the phrase, like, even if there's turbulence, you have to keep passing out the refreshments and the, like a flight attendant. And so those are all skills. You have to have a high EQ. You have to understand business strategy. You have to develop your own leadership style, management skills. And it's really hard. I'm actually trying to hire a CTO right now. And it's really hard to find technical leaders who've bridged that gap from being buried in the code in a sweatshirt to having to talk to people and figure out a management style. So really strong technical leaders are hard to come by because you start as a coder, right? And then how do you just magically develop great business management skills? It's a totally different mindset, different skill set. And there's some killers out there who can do both, but most people can't.
I feel like there's a lot to build a business. And, maybe like you said, there's some people that basically have it all. But in the end, if you're really after speed and solving a bunch of problems at the same time, that there's questions of strategy and, like you said, raising money from investors and marketing and sales and all these things that require attention, experience, and skills. That's, outside of the regular kind of coding person's skill set and mindset potentially. And I completely agree with you that it's, people do forget, but that the typical entrepreneur in the United States still remains middle-aged person with business experience.
Yeah.
And they go and they start a company off of a lot of what they're bringing to the table is their Rolodex, their experience of business, skills on how to manage people and everything else.
Yeah.
I think that's teachable. I think we can put that into the hands of younger entrepreneurs.
Absolutely.
But you're putting these business skills in their hands. And I think it's important not to underestimate the importance of that.
Absolutely.
Great. So let's dive into chapter 5, titled Do People Care? It's actually a much longer title, but this is kind of like the differentiating part of this title versus some of the other chapters.
Right.
And it really focused on some of the specifics of how to do customer discovery. And really the focus of this book is how to move from like a pre-revenue business to revenue business in a way that you're positioned to succeed. Yeah. So that you're not you haven't blown through too much capital by the time you got there. You didn't over raise. That's kind of the focus of the book.
Yeah.
So that I just first ask you, what are your kind of initial thoughts on the chapter and did it resonate with you or not?
It was such a roller coaster. There were moments where I was like, this is not the real world. It doesn't go down like that. And then there were moments where I was like, fair point. Yes. And I even saw things that I'm like, we should have done that. Kind of a range of emotions. I think, the first thing that really stood out to me the most, and I have a unique kind of beef with this, is that I think entrepreneurial curriculum has leaned so hard, pun intended, into the lean startup mentality. And it's like we need entrepreneurs that are going to save our society, right? We need people that are going to get us to the moon, that are going to develop vaccines, that are going to do things that we can't even imagine right now to help us get to the next level, like the Steve Jobs, right? He wasn't solving a problem for anybody. He was inventive. He was coming up with things that are going to take society to the next level. And so it's the whole, I know they use the phrase in the book, the Henry Ford phrase, if I'd asked them for faster, what they wanted, they would say faster horses, right? And it said it's overused, but I actually think it's underused. I think we've swung so far in the other direction of solve a problem that some of us aren't thinking big enough. And I'm not even, right? I'm solving a problem with my business. I'm pretty in line with this curriculum, but I just feel like I needed to get a plug in for that because there are a lot of things out there that became huge innovations for society that weren't solving the problem that we were aware of at the time. So
that really resonates with me. One of the things that I like about the lean startup approach is that it's very scientific in its methodology. It's you have an idea, you kind of build a data framework to kind of test the validity of it. Right. You find support through it from data, you kind of move on. If you don't, you kind of revise your theory. This is very much what science is like.
Yeah.
The interesting thing I find is that when people start applying the lean startup, it also kind of they often narrow down to your describing to kind of very incremental steps. Excuse me, instead of the way scientists often use this, which is I'm going to step into the unknown. Yeah. I'm going to make a discovery no one's ever seen before. Yeah. And they use the same tools that this book talks about in abstract to kind of to make those giant leaps. Right. And so I do find it, I totally agree with you that there's kind of this gap between the use of the tools and how it's kind of showed up at the moment.
Right.
And I think a lot of it comes down to how investors think about this to kind of reduce risk instead of maybe thinking about what's the biggest risks that we should be taking.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that I would love to talk about, because it's a good example from our specific journey. There was a lot of conversation about these tools, which to me felt academic, But that's just because I jumped off a cliff with my business, right? Like, I'm not saying that's the right way. It felt very academic to me. And so I'm looking at like, make a scorecard, write these things down. And to me, I'm like, we didn't really do it that way. And I think it's not that either way is right or wrong. I think it's just another example of the way that we did it. I think a lot of the rhetoric was like, get these quantitative metrics down to show them to investors, right? This many people said they wanted my product. This many people said they wanted this feature. Like that's one kind of quantitative metric. So is revenue though. So that's kind of the route that we took, was we pushed in the true nature of MVP, right? Like we were selling financial statement data and we only had coverage of like 500 companies, which is useless for most investors, right? They might want to look at some obscure ticker if they're analyzing a stock. And well, sorry, we only have coverage of 500 stocks right now. And we did it anyway, and we priced it super low, and we just threw it out there. We learned so much from those people. They were like an outsourced data quality team for us of hundreds of people. So on one hand, you can look at that as like, okay, well, was that risky? Yes, because we did have to get the website built. We had to get payment processing installed, all these things that were, cost into getting it up and running. But for me, I feel like that was our way of testing the market, and we were making money while we were doing it. Small money, and we've raised prices a lot since then. But I think it's just an example of those quantitative metrics can be the scorecard in the interviews and those things, but they can also just be, look, people are paying us for this, even at its MVP stage. And that's kind of the direction that we took in the beginning.
To focus on the revenue almost exclusively.
Yeah. Well, and it was feedback too, but it was like, instead of calling people that weren't customers and asking them for feedback, we just published our website and marketed and then got feedback after you're talking to customers.
I get it. So like you're kind of skipping the interview stage maybe in the way that they're describing it here in the book, right? And, I'll be honest with you. Every entrepreneur I've talked about the book so far, there's a lot of documentation and process and steps that nobody's doing.
Yeah.
That everyone's skipping over. There's a lot of like write stuff down, like create documents and everything else, for good or for worse. Like I'd love to talk to the entrepreneur that basically said like, I did chapter 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, then 5, and now I have $1 billion company. I just haven't got a chance to chat with them. So maybe that's a differentiating factor.
Yeah.
But you're not alone in that, in that comment.
Yeah.
Other thoughts on the book? You said you had like pros and cons and things like that.
Yeah, I think I'm just looking through some of my notes right now. I definitely wrote like, if you're assembling the plane as you're falling off the cliff, sometimes like you can't write things down in a scorecard, right? To our previous point, right? Like whether it's like your wife is mad at you because you haven't brought any money, or you don't have any funding, or there's competitive pressure, or you have a bug like in your code, that just there's an inordinate amount of fires that come up that prohibit you from following a rubric a lot of the time. And some of the experiments are unfeasible too. Like the one thing I did take issue with was they were talking about like an example with AdWords. And I'm like, that's expensive. Like it especially depending on what industry you're in, depending on the type of keywords you're using, what the competition looks like. If you're in a disruptive space, if you're trying to be disruptive, you're probably competing for AdWords against huge businesses that have major budgets, and you're just going to get crushed. So it's almost like, unless the experiment is big enough, unless the sample size is big enough, it's hard to prove anything with AdWords. And I think most people aren't going to have the kind of money in the beginning to do that. So that one stuck out at me a little bit.
That's interesting. And it might, basically partly be influenced by when these ideas were first created, that AdWords were a lot cheaper probably than they are now for a lot of these different categories. So yeah, super interesting insight.
Yeah.
So what would you do instead then? Like if you can't do that?
Yeah, I think the one thing that I tried to fight against in my head, but I was like, no, the book is right, Rachel, the book is right, was like just getting out there and talking to people. When I look back on it, it's super painful, but different things move the needle at different points in the journey, right? So like you go to this networking event, you're spending hours, which today would be such valuable time for me. Like I'm not going to go to a regional networking event right now that doesn't move the needle for my business at all. We have clients in Singapore, right? But at the time, it hugely moved the needle. I talked to one angel investor who would give me a little piece of advice, or one former analyst who had an opinion on the product. And so different things move the needle at different times. Looking back on it, my instinct was like, oh, networking. But I'm like, no, Rachel, you did that. Like you went to these like local startup groups and you did this stuff, and you went to these events and you get on the phone and you do it even if you don't know what the hell you're talking about, because oftentimes you don't in the beginning. Like when I was learning how to pitch and going to these events, I didn't know what I was doing. So it takes a lot of guts to get there, but you do have to just talk to people, call them, reach out on LinkedIn. There was a lot of like, call everyone you know, call your uncle, call your aunt, call your former boss. And it's true, right? You have to leverage your network and do what you need to do in the beginning. And so that did resonate with me. It's like, LinkedIn's annoying, let's be honest, right? Like no one likes getting reached out to on LinkedIn, but LinkedIn's a great tool. Just going to find websites, and a lot of times there's emails on websites, your network, your friends, your former boss. You have people. It just takes work to think through who your people are. And then those people introduce you to other people and your network grows. Getting the feedback from those people and just getting on the phone, just doing the work feels laborious, feels like you're not making progress, but it does move the needle in the beginning.
Got it. And do you ever like, do you have words of encouragement for somebody that's getting like a lot of negative feedback on the phone? Like, is that something that you struggled with, or for you, was it like a lot of positive feedback?
Oh my gosh, no, it was bad. It also depends what you're doing, right? Like we're in a really niche space. Financial data, like the intersection of technology and investing, like it's super niche. And then you get all these old Wall Street guys that don't understand what you're doing. And then you're a female founder, right? Like you get all these boxes checked for you. And a lot of people tell you no. So if you're in an innovative space, you definitely got to be ready for that, because people will push back against you. And so it's just grit, right? Like you've got to start by doing something you really care about, because that's the only thing that's going to get you through those phone calls. Like it's demoralizing. It really is. I mean, when I was raising my angel rounds of investment, I heard no probably 200 times from at least 200 investors. Then I raised $5 million, right? So it's like, you have to get through those demoralizing times. The only thing that'll get you through the demoralization of hearing no that many times is really caring about what you're doing, which is the first step. So I think that's important. Might feel like I'm rambling here, but this brought me to another point I read about.
Let me ask you something before you jump into that point. So don't forget that point. We'll go right back to it.
Yep.
So you did mention some of the challenges of being a female founder.
Yes.
So I want to pick your brain a little bit on that and see like what other thoughts you might have for other female founders, and also what other thoughts you might have for investors. Like say, hey, you should think about things a little bit differently based on my experiences.
Yeah, I don't love, like, I'm happy to have the conversation, but like, I do feel like things have changed. And I think sometimes we do a disservice to women by like putting them in a special box. Like I've gotten to the point where if people ask me to speak at a conference and it's like a female founders conference, I'm like, no, change the name. I'm just a business owner. And the more you label it, the more you put me in a special corner.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to say I made it because someone gave me attention because I was a woman. I want to say I made it because I built an amazing product. And so I think a lot of women are starting to feel that way. It doesn't mean we shouldn't have the conversation, because we're not there yet and we do need to have it, but it's just a point of like, sometimes we can over categorize it a little bit. Oh, I had like inappropriate interactions with male investors. I had somebody ask me once, who does all the math for me? I had someone call it a cute project. Like in the early days, 5-6 years ago, it was bad. I think it's changed a lot. I think, you've got venture funds in San Francisco now who, from an investment thesis perspective, will only invest in women because they've proven to have higher ROI. Like it's not a social cause. It's we're going to make more money if we invest in you guys. So You're starting to see that happen. So I wouldn't be worried about it. You have to have a little bit of resilience and be ready to have your guard up a little bit, but I would encourage women to just go for it because the game has changed. The playing field is leveling. We're not there yet, but it is so much easier than it was 5-10 years ago. And I think from an investor standpoint, there was a study done, I think it was what's that TechCrunch? What's that huge conference in San Francisco? I can't remember the name of it.
TechCrunch Disrupt, is that it?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Someone did a big study and they had male and female investors interviewing male and female founders. Both the male and female investors asked negatively oriented questions to the women, positively oriented questions to the men. So they would ask a male founder, or they'd ask a female founder, how much competition is there in this space? They'd ask a male founder, how big is the market size? How big is the opportunity? And the women were doing it too, right? Which is the scary piece. The female VCs were doing the same positive, negative thing. So from the female founder side, it's like, learn how to flip the question. If you receive a negative question, learn how to flip it. Sure, there's competition, but let's talk about how big the market size is. So there's little techniques that women can use to flip those, because it's subconscious. If the women are doing it, that just proves it's just subconscious. It's been ingrained in us for a long time, and that doesn't get unraveled overnight.
Yeah, it's super helpful. So back to that point you're going to make.
Yes. So I can't remember exactly where they were talking about this, but it was like when you're doing the hard work, getting on the phone, making the calls, going onto LinkedIn, try to find the innovators. And that's so true. But there's two sides to the coin. So it's definitely true that if you find someone that's not innovative, you are going to go down a rabbit hole and completely waste your time. I mean, they're going to have a million questions. They're not going to understand. They're going to push back on you. Just waste your time. And these huge corporations can be like sinkholes. I've done it multiple times where there's a shiny penny, like someone from maybe a Goldman Sachs or a BlackRock would reach out to us, $7 trillion under management. And that's a shiny penny. And you just go down a rabbit hole and waste your time because you're not talking to the people that are actually in charge of innovation or understand technology at all. So I saw that in the book and I was like, yes, huge problem. Definitely be aware of that. There's a flip side to that too. You can also come across the people that just think technology is really cool and don't have any decision-making power at all. And so if they're not a decision maker, and those are hard questions to ask when you feel like you're on your heels, like you're the one that needs something, it's a hard question to be like, can you get me to the person who actually can help me or can make a decision? And then to make matters even more complicated, sometimes they're too busy if you get too high up. Like I went through a program in Atlanta called Engage VC. It's a really interesting model. All the LPs are corporations headquartered in Atlanta. So AT&T, Delta, Home Depot, UPS, Invesco, and they give you each startup gets a quarterback at each company, and they specifically place them so that they're close enough to the C-suite where they can get the ear of this public company and make things happen for you, but they're not the CEO, right? Because the CEO is not going to have time for you. And so they strategically place them, someone who cares about innovation, who's high up enough to actually make things happen for you, but not so high up that they aren't going to have time to even focus on you.
Yeah.
That's a tough target to hit.
Yeah, that's a really, really good model. So I'm glad you brought that up about the customers versus the innovators as a key distinction that you liked in the book. Mm-hmm. Another thing that kind of popped in my head is sort of like these influencers.
Yeah.
And when to kind of reach out to them. So what are your thoughts on like, when do you want to learn from them? Because, at this stage in the development of the business in the book, it's like you're trying to find stuff that the market will be receptive to, that you want to sell, and you're kind of molding your product to meet the needs of customers. Mm-hmm. And one thing might be is that you want to find something that influencers will be excited to sell.
Yeah.
And on the flip side, you go to them too early. Like, how do you go to them with like nothing? So I wanted to ask you your thoughts on that. Like, have you used influencers in your business?
We haven't, because I do think that that's kind of more of a B2C thing. If you're in the B2C market and you've got any type of consumer-based product where like mass marketing like that works and people are paying attention to influencers, there's a caveat, right? Like, corporations and businesses follow influencers too. I think it works better when you're in a B2C business. So, which is not my business. I'm not the expert on it, but if I was in a B2C business, 100% that would be a route I would take. But it's probably not easy to get in front of the right people. And then also from a business perspective, like a lot of these influencers now have expensive fees for mentions and stuff. So timing it right so that you're at a place in the business where you have a marketing budget to do that. And probably more so if you're in the B2C space. But right now, yes, that is a huge medium. If you're in the right industry, that can be expansive for you.
Yeah. I mean, it's the marketing budget, and also, depending on the product you're shipping, the ability to serve the demand if it pops, and the ability to take the bullet if it doesn't pop, given the investments you might have to make to be ready to deal with that. So the influencer thing, I think, is definitely really challenging.
Definitely.
That's actually one of the things on my list. I'm glad that you brought it up. There's also kind of like part of the book is this like discipline framework where like you have a business model that you create hypotheses to see if it's valid, and you're going out and testing and everything else. Mm-hmm. And I know you mentioned earlier that you took a less structured approach in building your business, but like if you're going to build another business from scratch, when you're reading through this, were you saying to yourself like, this looks like a lot of busy work to me, I wouldn't do it that way? Or were you looking at this and seeing like, no, this is like a good way of kind of structuring my innovation or my thinking?
I do think it's a good way to structure it. We had a unique path. Like we needed data ourselves. Like, and so we actually started to go solve the data problem, thinking that we were going to consume it ourselves and keep going down that. So we had a unique path. We could have been way more disciplined, right? Like we weren't necessarily mapping out like what is our total addressable market. Like we weren't sending people surveys. So it probably, I mean, I think it's smart. If I did it again, I probably would do more. I don't think I would do everything, but because there's an art to it too. And I know the book does mention that, and I love that they acknowledge it, right? They're like, this is part science, part art. So I wouldn't do everything. It's just not how my brain works. I'm more of a kind of get out there and get it going kind of a person. And there are some things you just have to jump off the cliff with. So there's a happy medium. We didn't do enough of this probably, but I wouldn't do all of it is kind of, I guess, where I would land with it. And it also depends on the business, right? Like it depends what kind of innovation you're building, what kind of industry you're in, how fast you need to move, whether or not you've got funding. There are a lot of factors that will determine like how much of it all you need to do, I think.
What you can do. I got it. Okay. There's this, like at the beginning of the chapter, there's this like list of the key rules from this customer development manifesto, which is like listed out in chapter 2. It's sort of like the tablets of the book, you know, the 10 commandments, so to speak.
Yeah.
I think there's more than 10. And these are the 5 bullet points I want to kind of ask you to kind of see if they resonate with you or not. Yeah. So one is customer discovery is done by the founders.
Yes.
Why?
Typically it's only you in the beginning, and you need to do it. You need to do it immediately. You don't wait till you have a team to do it. So, I mean, just by a function of it, you're the only one there in the beginning. You need to do it super early. And if it's going to be super early, you probably don't have a team yet. And also it's just such a critical part of the business and the strategy that as the founder and the CEO, you need to be totally in tune with your customers and the direction you're headed in. And that never goes away no matter what size you're at. So you just got to be part of it from the beginning.
Okay, good. Second is hypotheses require testing. So I guess you're buying into the hypothesis framework here with the second manifesto. Right. So hypotheses require testing. Testing requires experiments to be designed.
Yes. So, and that never stopped. The one thing that I thought through when I was reading this is that doesn't stop. You never stop. I mean, we're A/B testing our website, our sign-up forms, everything, calling customers, getting net promoter scores still today. We've been in the business for 5 years. So yes, 100%, and it doesn't go away. And you've got to do as much of it as you can. It's all about optimizing your sales funnel and the value you bring into your customers. So we're really unique. We have an extremely technical team. I'm a former engineer. My chief operating officer has a master's of data analytics. We've got machine learning engineers. So everybody, we're lucky because everybody has such a data-driven mentality in our business. So the more technical people you can surround yourself with, like even your marketers, having really technical marketers who are going to design those experiments for you, super important.
And why is it important for the experiments to be designed? I guess the other alternative is like you're just kind of looking at data.
You can't measure success. Yeah, I mean, unless you know what you're looking for, you can't measure success. And knowing what success and what failure looks like from the beginning and how you're going to track it and what tools you're using, it just requires some upfront work. It doesn't have to be robust, right? It's like classic statistics, data analytics stuff. Like you have to have a hypothesis, you have to have what does success look like, what tools are you using? And it doesn't have to be crazy because you do need to move fast in all of this stuff. But yeah, I mean, in order to know whether it's working or not, you have to design it.
Got it. Okay. The next one is the importance of face-to-face kind of feedback. We already talked about that one.
Yep.
This next one, customer meetings aren't about learning whether customers love the product, at least not yet. They're about understanding the problem and how urgently your potential customers need to solve that problem. You'll focus more on the product itself once you're certain of the problem it solves. So big enough to create a market is worth going after. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, a couple thoughts on that. So yes, that's important in the very, very beginning. And asking for feedback is huge. Knowing when to stop asking for feedback and ask for the sale, though, we didn't do a great job of that. We were on our heels thinking we'd just get in the door by asking, we're not asking for anything. We just want to get feedback, when it was like, all right, it's time to start selling, like get your revenue going. And so this is an important stage. I agree with the book. You have to get out there and ask for feedback and do the work, but when do you stop is a really hard thing to figure out. And it's unique to every company. So just being self-aware of like, are we there? Are we ready? Like, should we start asking for the sale and getting revenue in the door? It's really hard to figure out when that time is. So something to be aware of.
So let's talk about that. No one's brought that up with me before about this kind of like this shift between just asking for feedback to starting to sell.
Yeah.
And I've got like a whole host of questions in my mind. I can imagine people are scared to start selling. So they keep doing the feedback thing. I can imagine that maybe they're selling too early. Like, they start without actually listening carefully to the person they're talking to. So do you want to elaborate on that at all?
Yeah. I mean, I don't have a background in sales. I'm naturally a good salesperson for Intrinio because I'm passionate and I've been here from the beginning and I've learned how to give the pitch so well. But I don't have a background in sales. So I think, and if I look back on it, I was scared, right? And that's frankly part of being a woman, right? Imposter syndrome, like that's just genetically how we are. But men have imposter syndrome too, especially if you're a founder and you care about what you're doing. It can be scary to ask sometimes. And so I think everyone's lying if they tell you they don't feel that at some point in the beginning. And so breaking through that, I wish I would have taken a little bit of like sales training or something in the beginning, looking back on it. Would have helped me learn how to make the ask, when to make the ask. It's hard to give advice on this one because every business is different, right? Like if you're in some deep biotech, this stage is like 5 years long, right?
Yeah.
Versus like some consumer thing where you can get it out there really quick. So every company is different, every industry is different, but just getting comfortable standing up for what you've built and knowing that someone should be paying for it, maybe a little bit of sales training, those things can help, but it is pretty unique to each company.
Okay, so that's excellent and very helpful. So the next thing I wanted to jump and ask you about is it's more around a question of like, how do you like interpret the data once you start getting some positive feedback? And there's this little section here in the book about I think it's on page 193, okay, which is it's about this notion of a strong grab. It's basically like if you start an experiment and you suddenly start getting like a lot of positive feedback. If I remember that section of the book correctly, it's like, stop, you've gotten what you need, mm-hmm, and then move on and sell, basically, I guess is the inference, and build and sell. Yeah. What are your thoughts of that? As a statistician, I'm curious about what others might think about that section.
Yeah, well, sample size is important, right? Yeah. And you have to design, that's part of designing the experiment, right? Like what is the correct sample size? If you design your experiment well, you should know ahead of time where that stopping point is, right? Theoretically, right? Yeah. You're probably more of an expert at stats than I am, but I would think if you design a good experiment, you should know ahead of time how many people you need to ask or what your sample size needs to look like. So the design stage is important. And it's this is almost like an emotional thing, right? Like it's exciting to get good feedback, and it's that shiny penny thing again that can lead you astray. Not everybody's going to love what you're doing. The no's are more important than the yeses, right? You should want more of them, and you should want to learn more about that. But it can be exciting when someone says yes, or you get a 10 people that say yes, this is amazing, and then you're just roaring and ready to go. So like keeping that emotion in check and being like, let's keep going, stick to the experiment, stick to the sample size. It's all very important.
Why the no's more important than the yeses?
Because the yeses can just be self-validating sometimes. And the no's is where you learn. Your product is never going to be perfect. Because I also wrote another article called The Art of Being Wrong, and why people who are wrong and hear no more often actually end up being smarter. Because when you hear yes, you don't learn anything. You just validate something you already knew. You don't get any smarter. Your product doesn't get any better. But actively seeking the no's and wanting to hear the bad things is like a weird mentality to get into, but that's how you get smarter. That's how your product gets better. It's never going to be perfect. There will always be negative feedback out there for you. You have to get into the mentality of liking it.
So it's easier to say yes and no, and the no is, if they tell you why, you're really getting something out of it. It's super helpful. Mm-hmm. What other thoughts do you have of the book on the chapter?
Looking through some of my notes right now. Every founder needs to have 10 conversations a day. That's one of the, like, there's a lot of truth to this book. That's one of those that I would be like, again, right? Like, what if you're talking to an investor? What if you have an employee emergency? Like it's just, some of these aren't realistic, but it's at least a good goal to shoot. It's a good benchmark, right? Like try on average to shoot for 10 conversations a day. That made a lot of sense to me. I have a note in here that says customers can be dumb. This just goes back to the lean startup piece, right? Like sometimes they don't know what they want. And to your earlier point, which I really love, like bridging the gap between the lean startup and the crazy innovators. Some of the stuff still works, whether or not you're solving a real problem that exists. Like you should still ask people if they'd like a car, right?
Yeah.
What if I told you we put the horse on wheels? Would you like it? Right? That conversation had to happen at some point. So breaking through that, because sometimes the customers just don't even know what they want. I also have a note about making sure you're talking to the right people. And maybe I interpreted this wrong in the book, but it was like, call everyone. And it's like, and I even said that earlier, but like narrowing down your target, if you know what your target is, and only talking to those people. Even today, I was on a sales call with my team just to step in and kind of monitor. And as they're talking to the guy, within 30 seconds, I was like, nope, stop wasting your time. Get off the phone with this guy. This is not the use case. We're not going to solve his problem. And even 5 years into the business, that's happening, right? So it never goes away, but like making sure you're talking to, if you're going to do the experiment, the sample size is important. The sample quality is important too. Because if these are not the right people that are going to be using your product, your signal is off. You're getting noise.
What are some signals that the quality's off?
It's hard because sometimes they're positive, right? And it's a positive signal that's wrong.
Yeah.
So it can be hard to tell sometimes when you're getting positive feedback from the wrong people. But I think that's where the importance of asking questions is. So when you're doing these interviews, when you're doing these surveys, when you're getting out there, really think through what you're going to ask them. And like, it's the same thing as a sales qualification call, which is more of a sales disqualification call. You should be trying to disqualify them as fast as you can. But having a list of questions to validate, is this the right person to be talking to ahead of time, just makes it easy for you. You know, if they answer the questions right or wrong, you know whether or not you're talking to somebody in your target market.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. So there are a lot of like process oriented like documents in this chapter and throughout the book. Frankly, it's like, here's what this presentation looks like, or here's something called a customer discovery scorecard, and like make one of these things.
Right.
And I think, I can imagine a lot of these come from, this book came from, experienced entrepreneurs and investors then stepping into the classroom. I think a lot of it might be them trying to basically provide these tools that if people do these things and follow these steps, they're going to have success. And so that's why they're creating them.
Right.
But then there's a lot of paperwork then involved in here that we already talked about earlier that often isn't really used. Mm-hmm. But I wanted to ask you, reading through this chapter, was there anything in particular that jumped out at you where you said, like next time around, I'm going to do that. Like I'm going to build one of those things or whatever.
Yeah.
Or was there nothing like that you picked up on?
I think we do some of it. I think that if you kind of like abstract beyond it a little bit, there's a lot of tools out there that do that for you. Like Net Promoter Score can be calculated using all these marketing softwares. And so like we're doing a lot of it, but it's already in our marketing software, or we have a database where we're collecting this information. But that's just because of the stage I'm at with the business. Early on, I probably would do a lot of this stuff. And I think there wasn't any document that stood out in specific. It was just like, some of this stuff might've been smart. We learned the hard way, definitely. Probably not all of it, but I think the important thing to recognize too is just your personality type. Like, are you a 0 to 1? Like I'm a big picture kind of, I am not sitting down and filling that chart out. Like, I'm just telling you right now, like it's not happening. I'm like working on big partnerships, talking to investors, thinking about the vision. I've got a great chief operating officer though. And he's got a master's in data analytics and he would be all over this stuff. Right. And so if you're naturally oriented that way, do it. It's not going to hurt you to have this information, right? It's only going to make your business better. But if you've got a personality like me, have someone that's that kind of data and technically oriented that can go through this stuff. Chief of staffs are becoming really popular now in startups. I've been hearing this a lot. Like if you've got a chief of staff who's like very data driven and organized and wants to write everything down and capture things. For me, it's chief operating officer. They're very similar. So I think there's a personality aspect to it too, because like I'm just moving fast, but the work needs to get done. It's just find the right person to help you get it done.
Yeah, there is a time trade-off there with a lot of these tools and so on. Talk about this chief of staff person. Like, what do they do?
It's actually my brother, believe it or not. I don't know if anybody watches the show Billions, but he's like the Wendy from that show. It's a hedge fund. They hire a psychologist to keep all the traders on point. He's got a master's in industrial organizational psychology, which is literally like psychology, like therapy for businesses. So he's like the calmest, can't get him upset. He's the center midfielder, like managing everything. But he also has a master's in data analytics. So he takes a super analytical approach to operations. So we track everything. We've got custom analytics, graphs, charts. Like he'd be all over this, like data gathering and all over this. So he's super brilliant. We get along well with my brother. He's my best friend. So that helps. Sometimes it's a red flag for investors, but then when they meet us, they realize that it's actually a benefit. There's a lot of trust there. Psychology and analytics, when applied to operations, he's like keeps the ship afloat when I have to be out fundraising or talking to big customers. He does an amazing job.
Got it. Thank you. And something else I really should have asked, maybe a little bit earlier when you're jumping into tools and kind of process, what are the SaaS software products that you use and you think entrepreneurs should be using if they're building a SaaS business, to help in the customer discovery phase or this early stage of the business?
Yeah. So we use HubSpot on the website, which is incredible. We use it for our CRM. We use it for all of our automated marketing workflows and drip campaigns and email campaigns. And there's really good analytics in HubSpot. I mean, we can track customers at every stage of the process. It captures all of our customer feedback in one place. I don't know where we'd be without HubSpot right now. I mean, like between marketing, sales, analytics, testing, our marketing team uses a lot of kind of A/B testing software for the website. I don't know exactly which software they use for A/B testing. On the revenue side, we use a platform called SaaS Optics, which is like from a financial side, takes care of all the revenue recognition and like crazy stuff when you're trying to calculate what do your metrics actually look like in a SaaS business if you have people paying you monthly and annually, and it's kind of a mess. So it's amazing software to keep like just a pulse on the business. Like, where's your revenue at? What do your metrics look like? So we use both SaaS Optics and Chart Mogul for tracking metrics and revenue of the business as a whole. But I'd say HubSpot, just the analytics inside HubSpot, we can calculate, net promoter score and all that stuff within there. So, and they have hugely amazing discounts for startups. You get like 1 or 2 years of just like ridiculously low price when you're getting started because it gets expensive after that. So they are nice to startups.
Excellent. Very happy to hear that. All right. So we're coming up on time and I want to be respectful of your time. I wanted to ask you, is any other like parting shots, advice for entrepreneurs out there that you have at this stage around customer discovery or anything?
No, I think just be resilient. If you really believe in what you're doing, there's never a right time to do it. Like this all may seem overwhelming and annoying and like a lot of work, and it is, but it's so worth it if you really care about what you're doing. So don't let it discourage you. Take a lot of it to heart. There's a lot of stuff in here I should have done that I highly recommend people follow through with. So just get after it. There's no right time to start a business. Just got to do it. Just got to push yourself over the cliff.
All right, great. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate the conversation today.
Yeah, it was fun. Thanks, John.